Yeah, back to back is a good card. I'm gonna bump this to 9. I think this card is actually really, really low key. I think this is really, really big. I'm going to explain why, and I'm gonna do that by talking about one of the fundamentals of Runeterra deck building that I think nobody is really talking about or thinking about, including me. This is something that I need to think more about in my deck builds. Basically, the idea of deck building around the concept of open attacking. Now, in deck building, one of the concepts in deck building is different criteria, different categories of cards will want balance of stuff, right? Okay. So one way of that is mana curve. You want to balance your curve. You want a balance of early game options, mid game options, late game options, etc. That's one. Another one is you want a certain amount of spells for spell mana. And a third one is you want a certain amount of reactivity versus proactivity, right? That's an important balance too. And that's actually it's similar to the spells, but not quite, because you can have proactive spells and you can have reactive units, right? But there is overlap between proactivity, reactivity versus spells. You want a deck that's mostly proactive with some reactive options, pretty much always. A control deck will have more reactive options than otherwise, but they will still need to skew very far for proactive options, which is part of the reason why cards like Hapless Aristocrat are pretty great in control, right? So the balance will shift a bit depending on the archetype, but for the most part, you still do need a lot of proactive options even in a deck like Control, right? Otherwise, you're going to be stuck, okay? One aspect that is unique to Runeterra, which is why not a lot of people have thought about it yet, is the idea of balancing open attack punishers versus open attack forcers. So basically, just a fundamental of like all card games in general is the idea that you want to develop a situation that's game theory optimal, which is to say, given your opponent being an intelligent agent, you want to force them into a position where they are trapped between two options and neither of which is a strong option from their perspective. That's what game theory optimal basically means, right? And part of that, for example, in poker, what this would involve is adding a bit of randomness to your play so that they don't know what you're doing, right? Forking in chess is a decent example, right? Basically give them two bad options. The decision to open attack or not open attack is a really, really, really important decision. Open attacking is very powerful, so you do need some cards in your deck that are going to make them feel like they have to open attack, otherwise you will abuse them. And these are cards like Avalanche, these are cards like expensive units, these are slow speed cards like Stuns, maybe even slow speed cards like even like Winter's Breath, which is not, this isn't a good card, but it's an example of what I mean. It's like a slow speed, big, if you don't open attack me, you're screwed. I'm gonna drop this on you and you're gonna wish you had, right? And the second kind of card to fit, of course, in the opposite category is a card that punishes the opponent for open attacking. And this can basically only be achieved by a fairly expensive burst speed combat trick that will affect multiple units on the board. And that can be back-to-back. It can be harsh winds. I guess it can be Stand United, sure. And it can even be Bloodsworn Pledge, which is maybe a bit weaker, but I think this is fine too. At 4 mana, it could be better than Harsh Winds as well. Although this, the Frostbite is good synergy with Frostbite decks. But that's kind of it. So think about that. You have a deck building concept, Judgment Fiora. Judgment Fiora a little bit. The one problem with Judgment Fiora is it's very answerable. I don't think I would put Judgment in this category actually. Judgment Fiora is actually better often when it's not an open attack. It's better when you attack with everything, but with Judgment Fiora, if you're only attacking first, when I go to Judgment, that will probably cost my entire mana pool, and you might have an answer. You have good odds of having an answer up. Doesn't have to be Deny. It can be something that lowers my Fiora's attack, like Brittle Steel or a Frostbite. It can be something that basically kills my card that I'm using Judgment on, right? So Judgment Fiora, a bit, I might put that in the category, but it would be weaker. The point is that a deck building fundamental is you want a certain subset of cards that will pressure your opponent into open attacking, and cards that will punish your opponent for open attacking. This is part of the reason why Deny is a good card, because Deny is also a card that works well when you have a meta that's open attacking. It's also something that costs spell mana, and it's also something that can counter certain things that capitalize off of open attacking. Judgment being a decent example of that. Now you'll notice we're talking about burst speed cards because they can't be denied, and that's important. Okay, so the first principle We need cards that will pressure an open attack, and we need cards that will punish an open attack, okay? Both. Good decks, I think, should need both of those cards, period. If they want to be a tier 1 deck, they need both. B, there are a lot of cards that can punish... there are a lot of cards that can pressure an open attack. There's a lot of those cards. A lot of slow speed, big units, a lot of, like, high value, big plays. You know, slow speed spells like Avalanche, slow speed stuns, I guess, although those are typically weak cards. There's a ton of... most cards in the game will just kind of by default pressure pressure an open attack to happen. There's very, very few cards that will punish open attacks. Now, Deny is one of them, and like I said, these burst cards are as well. And that is, I think, why back-to-back is so powerful. And, you know, the Harsh Winds, and even like Bloodsworn Pledge, and Deny, and some other... they don't have to be burst, some of them can be fast speed spells as well. You know, I mean, we can look at some fast speed spells that do this as well, right? Because, you know, you're deniable, but you're still able to use your mana before the combat in a way that forces a response, right? These are still cards like Vengeance. These are cards like Detain, right? These are cards like, you know, maybe even like Static Shock is okay. The box isn't, of course. The box is unique because the box is... the box doesn't want to be played on an open attack. You want to play box after they have developed a few units. So the box is in the other category, right? And that is a large part of the reason why back-to-back is so good. It comes down to... it's kind of like economics, right? How do you play around back-to-back? I don't think you do. I think this card is actually categorically really, really strong. It's super, super underrated. I know there's a few people, like there's one guy in chat who's saying like he called it this entire time. Yeah, there's a few people who saw this coming. I think back-to-back is really strong. There's other cards of this category, but think of it from the terms of economics, right? There's a market demand. There's a high demand and a low supply of cards that can fulfill this unique role, which is a open attack punisher. When you have game theory and when that's being played out, you end up with something called the Nash equilibrium, which is basically when everyone's playing perfectly, this is what the decks are going to look like. Basically, that's a abridged way of saying it, okay? So back-to-back, when you're looking at market supply, there's very few cards that are actually going to be able to punish open attacking. Back-to-back happens to be a powerful card that's undeniable, which is big. That's very important that it can't be denied due to its burst speed. And it punishes the opponent really hard for trying to open attack. So we're going to have this card that's going to punish open attacking, and we're going to have a lot of cards, just natural cards, that are going to punish not open attacking. And in doing so, we're trapping our opponent in a way that can't really be countered. In a way that, even if they know what we're trying to do, they have to make a guess one way or another based on what we have in hand, etc. So I think this is one way we need to approach deck building. I'm going to go through my decks a bit and add in some spells that are going to be able to provide this kind of like open attack swing. I think a big criteria is they do need to be fairly expensive spells, I think, because you could have like 3 cheap combat tricks in your hand, but when your opponent open attacks on turn 5, you don't want to play like 3 cheap things, right? You want to use your mana in like a big way that's not going to cost you card advantage long term, all right? I do think this card is easily a 9. I could very easily see this being a 10. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I truly am not. I want you guys to know that I'm not exaggerating. I'll keep it at a 9 for now. This is a really, really good card. I think it might end up being like a 2 of auto include into Demacia. Why do you always say open attack only starts at turn 5? Because typically it only starts when one person has enough of a board developed. The aggressor will usually be more incentivized to flood the board before then, but the timing is going to vary based on matchup to matchup. It's also strong for open attacking, and that is exactly right, J-Skill. I actually, you know what? I was going to mention that. I had that in my head 10 minutes ago at the start of this speech, but then I rambled so much that I actually forgot about it. Yes. Yes, that's important. It's also strong for open attacking. Exactly. That's exactly right.